May I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen. Please be seated. It's the time of year when students all across the country are waiting for acceptance letters and scholarship notifications and having very complex conversations with their parents about their future and what prestigious institution they will begin living that out in. When I was making that decision about 17 years ago, where to go to college, I have to admit I was thinking less about academics and what the place I was going to would mean for my future than I was thinking about their lacrosse rankings, because I was being recruited to play. So when I decided to join Duke and I went down and started playing on their team, I felt really great about playing for one of our top teams in a Division I school. And I remember this very humbling and kind of wonderful moment at the beginning when all of the freshmen who were doing separate training from the rest of the team, because even though we thought we were all in great shape, we were not nearly in as good a shape as the rest of the team, was brought to meet this man who consulted with all of the Division I groups at Duke. And he had been a former Olympian in the 80s, and he was a track star. And he basically asked us to circle around, and our coach introduced him, and she said, "It is his job to teach you how to run." And we all looked at each other and we're like, all of us are All-Americans in high school, most of us were on national teams at that point. We knew how to run. Well, it turned out we didn't know how to run. This guy gave us the hardest, most grueling exercises, teaching us things about how we used our weight and where we put our legs and how we moved our arms and the angles at which we held our elbows. Things about the movements between our legs and arms and the balance that our body needed to move as efficiently and effectively through space as it possibly could. It turned out we knew a lot less about running than we thought we did. I like to think about this every year as we head into the season of Lent. Many of us have spent our lives trying to live deeply faithful, prayerful, disciplined days, and to put days after days where we are drawing closer to God. And yet, there's always more in our prayer life, in our disciplines of deepening our connection to God. There's always more to learn. There's always a new practice. There's always an opportunity before us to get closer than we ever thought possible. Every year at Lent, people make decisions about what to take on, about what to give up. We make commitments around disciplines that we think might be supportive of our relationship with God. We agree to limit chocolate and wine and Facebook, or take on some kind of daily prayer practice or reading the inspirations. And all of that is aimed at one simple thing: creating space for us to encounter God's love and God's heart in our midst. That's all it is. We're trying to make room to feel what is already truly real, but sometimes beyond our reach. Sometimes Lent seems like a bit of a downer. That first opening prayer about our wretchedness and our lamentable sins, every time it strikes me how strong that language is. But it always also strikes me as such a tremendous relief to gather with other people on this day and say, you know, this whole being human thing, it's kind of tough and takes a lot of work. And I'm relieved to know that we're in that together. I'm relieved to know that other people need moments to reframe. I'm relieved to know that we need this community to support us in that effort, and that we have a practice yearly of just naming that and working together on it. Still, I think the question of why undertake this season is a wonderful and rich one that rests before us time after time. There's a wonderful book that recently came out by a Duke Divinity School professor named Kate Bowler. It's called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. And it chronicles her journey as a 30-year-old mom and wife and professor being diagnosed with incurable colon cancer, which she is now managing, but still living very much what she describes as scan to scan. And so much of that book is about what happens when you can't pretend you're okay anymore. And I think we've probably all had moments where the rug was pulled out from us, where we lost something or someone or some part of ourselves that made it clear that we couldn't pretend anymore. We couldn't pretend that we could build up riches in heaven and riches on earth that were worthwhile, that there had to be something more. And that became plain to us. If by some incredible measure you've managed to have a life where you didn't have to face that reality, the truth is, this life is bounded, and that moment will come at the end of our lives. And so this practice, this discipline of letting go, of drawing closer to God intentionally, is something that we cultivate throughout our lives, that we take a moment to set aside 6 weeks and just give ourselves over to it, knowing that at some point we won't have the choice. But when that time comes, we'll be more familiar with the rhythms of drawing close to God, more familiar with letting go, more familiar with asking for help, more familiar with having a community that can support and sustain us, even when we can't pretend anymore that we're okay. I didn't have the word for what the running coach was doing when I got to Duke, but I have since learned that athletes and musicians in particular undertake something called deliberate practice. There are some disciplines, particularly these kind of constructive ones, where you really need a coach, somebody to just tell you one discrete skill that is just beyond your capacity, just beyond your comfort zone. Like in my case, let's say, a certain kind of dribble on my left hand that I just wasn't as strong in. I needed a coach to be able to tell me the tiniest little things that I could do to strengthen that. So it's not a skill that's way far, well beyond my reach. Something really discrete that you can then have a practice to get to. And then you build on that step by step. You get a new practice. You check in with that coach after just working on it over and over and over again. Our life of prayer is different from that in that sometimes God just gifts us with a felt sense of connection or some wonderful insight, and there's no explanation for it. But a lot of times it's quite similar to that. A lot of times prayer is like building up a muscle, and it gets sore at first, and it's uncomfortable, and it can feel like maybe we're not good at it. That's just part of the process. That's just part of building up that strength. So I encourage you this Lent to stretch yourself, to see this as an invitation to a truly holy and exciting and deeply graced season of life. And if you need some help on identifying what that next skill is, what that next little thing you could reach for might be, that's precisely why you have this community. That's precisely why you have a priest. That's precisely why we're here tonight, to offer that kind of guidance and support that can get us one step closer, one small bit, a little bit more open to God's grace and love before us. Amen.